say, or who would you say that you lie to the most in your life? Okay, let's just get ridiculously honest right here at the beginning of the year. All right, how many of you have ever lied before? Okay, anyone not raising their hand? Look at them and tell them they're a liar. Okay, because we've all lied, and we all often lie. But there's people, you've lied to your boss. You tell them you're sick, but you're really not. And if you're the boss, people do that often. You're like, oh, it's a great day, and so they lie to make sure that they can have a day off when they want to. Or have you ever lied to your kids? Your kids ask you something, and you say, we'll see. And we're not going to see, but I'm telling them that so I can stall, right? You ever do that to your kids? Or lie to your friends, or maybe lied on social media about how great and perfect and blessed your life really is, when behind closed doors you're thinking it's anything but those things. But who do you lie to the most? Who do you think you lie to the most? It may surprise you, but the research is actually really conclusive on this. The person that you lie to the most is yourself. You lie the most to yourself. In fact, experts say that we will lie dozens to sometimes hundreds of times to ourselves every single day. We say, I'll do that tomorrow. We say, I can stop whenever I want. We say, I'm fine. We say, I'm not really that anxious or that depressed about this. I don't care what they think. That's a lie a lot of us tell ourselves at times. I don't care what they think. It's not that big of a deal, but it really is. And we lie to ourselves. In fact, Jeremiah 17:9 tells us something very important for us to understand with this principle of our hearts. And what it says in Jeremiah 17:9 is this: the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Another translation says it this way: no one really knows how bad it is. Like, we don't even really know how bad our hearts are, how much we will lie to ourselves. The human heart, it has the capacity not only to lie to others, but to completely deceive ourselves. And so we're going to start with the habit this morning of heart evaluation. Getting into a rhythm or a routine heart checkup in our lives, evaluating our hearts. Now, I want these messages to be biblical, obviously, but I really and desperately desire for these messages also to be helpful and practical to us as well. But before we get into our first habit of heart evaluation, I believe it's important that we clarify a few things as we get into a series like this. I want us to, as we go through it, first of all, keep the gospel in view. Keep the gospel in view. Inevitably, when you talk about habits and doing things in the Christian life, you are tempted to wonder, isn't that legalistic? Like, we're worrying about the things that we should be doing. Isn't it the power of God that changes us and not the power of our habits? And what I'll try to remind us throughout the series is that, no, it's not legalistic. And yes, it is the power of God that changes us, habits included. And we'll specifically start with this in today's habit. But caring about our habits is not legalistic. What would be legalistic is saying that God loves you more because of your habits. What would be legalistic is saying that you can earn your salvation by picking the right habits. You can't, and thank God we don't have to be accepted in the beloved. But the good news of Christianity is that Jesus' death on the cross has paid for all of our failures, including our bad habits. And his resurrection from the grave is the promise of a new life, including new habits. And it's that work of God that saves us by grace through faith, not our works or our habits otherwise. The fact that God died while we were still sinners is a demonstration of his great love, and that love is why we care about our habits. Our habits won't change God's love for us, but God's love for us can and honestly should change our habits. So we need to keep the gospel in view as we go through this to know we're not doing this to gain God's love. We're actually looking at these habits because it's a reminder every day that he loves us as we do these things. And it will shape us, as we'll see in just a moment, it will shape us to also love the way that he loves. So we need to keep the gospel in view, and we need to keep love in view as we go through a series like this. Because love is our motivation in the Christian life. We're not working to attain God's love. We're working as an outflow of God's love. As Paul said to the church in Corinth, the love of Christ compels me, it constrains me, it motivates me. His love, God's love, is what motivates us. So we need to remember that. Love is our motivation. In the Christian life, love is also our goal. Not just our motivation, it's our goal. The rhythms and the routines that we'll cover in this series are not so that we might look better, but so that we might love better. Okay, we're not doing this so that we might look better. We're doing this so that we might love better. We're not just changing our appearance and people's perception of us by focusing on external things that we do. We're focusing on the internal heart of the matter, that by practicing these things that we'll cover in the series, implementing these habits into our lives, that as we do that, we will actually come out of it with the product of loving God more and loving people more. So love is the goal, okay? And then also love is our metric. Love is our metric. So when we look to habits, we don't say, well, I'm spiritual because I'm doing all of these things. That's not our metric. That's not how we measure our spiritual growth. We actually measure our spiritual growth by love. Love is our metric. The fruit of the Spirit is our metric, the beginning of which is love. In fact, Jesus even said when he was here on this earth, he said, by this will all men know that you are my disciples, that you have love for one another. And so our metric of spiritual growth, implementing these habits, is not the practices themselves, is not these rhythms and routines themselves, but rather the product that it is producing in our lives, which is love. Because the truth is, we can do all of these things that we're going to cover in this series and not have actually grown spiritually. You can do lots of stuff and not actually be growing spiritually. However, when we remember that love is the motivator, it's His love, it's the gospel that motivates us. Love is our goal, that we might love God, know Him better, and love people better. And that love is our metric, then it will keep us in line with the fact that we are doing this all motivated by and headed toward the goal of love and displaying of that love, the gospel, in our lives. So it's important to know all of that as we talk about habits, okay? Because naturally we just go, well, if we're talking about habits, we're just doing things. And you say all the time, we're not supposed to just focus on doing things, okay? And the truth is, yes, we're not supposed to focus on doing things to attain God's love, but it will produce some things in our lives. Faith, as we've seen in the book of James and even by Paul in the book of Ephesians, faith without works is dead. So good faith and love in Christ will produce certain habits and certain works in our lives. The truth is, our habits, they are important. It's often said in Christian books and self-help books even, that may not be Christian in nature. It's said, and it's true, that we will become our habits. We're kind of moving in the direction of our habits. If we don't change our habits, then we're going to end up down a specific kind of road in our life. And so it's said this way. It said, if you want to change your life, then you need to change your habits. If you want to change your life, then you need to change your habits. But often, that's where we stop. That's where we stop, is we just try to change our habits, and that's it. And that's why many of the New Year's resolutions that you have are likely going to fail every single year. All the people that were crowding the gym this week, okay, making me annoyed. They're going to be gone in about a month, and that's okay. A lot of them are going to be gone because they're only focusing on the external habits. They're not actually focusing on the identity of why they're doing what they're doing, the motivation behind it, or really the intent and the internal behind all those external behaviors. So often when we talk about habits, we say, if I want to change my life, I got to change my habits. And we stop there and we focus on external behavior, things that we do on the outside, things that I want to stop doing or things that I want to start doing. I want to get organized. I want to work out. I want to eat less, on down the line, all of those things. We focus on those external behaviors. But where external behaviors actually are born is in our hearts. And so it's true that to change our life, we must change our habits, but it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that, especially for the Christian. If you want to change your life, change your habits. But if you want to change your habits, let God change your heart. Okay? if you want to change your life, change your habits. But if you want to change your habits, let God change your heart. So this year, we're not starting on the outside, we're starting on the inside, and we're going to ask God to change our hearts. That's why we're starting this series with the rhythm of heart evaluation. God's word tells us in Psalm 139, this is a prayer of David that he wrote, and he says this, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." David prayed this prayer. Why do you think David prayed this prayer? Well, if you were to watch the life of David, trace it through the scriptures, you'll discover that over time, David started to understand the same thing that we need to understand. He started to understand his propensity to lie to himself. He was the master of self-deception. He would find this out really after a pivotal moment in his life that we find in 2 Samuel chapter number 12. And many people know this is like the big mess up of David's life with Bathsheba. And what you find as you look is he had first convinced himself. It tells you right at the get-go of the story, it says this, at the time when kings were supposed to be at war, David was at home. That's like how the whole story starts out. The kings are supposed to be in this place, but he's not in the place where he's supposed to be. David, already at the beginning of the story, we see has convinced himself that even though it was the time when kings went to war, he didn't need to, for whatever reason. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he thought, I've been to war quite often, and so I can sit this one out. But for whatever reason, he had convinced himself that he didn't need to, even though it was the time for kings to go to war. Then he ended up, if you continue the story, on his balcony, on his rooftop. And he saw a woman who was naked. She was bathing, and he looked at her. And he convinced himself there was nothing wrong with looking. And so the next word that's used is actually a word that means to stare deeply. So he convinced himself that it wasn't wrong to look, and so he stared. And then whatever had been going on in his mind, he then convinces himself that having this woman was a good idea, and so he sent servants to go and to bring her to him. And so she comes to his place, and he has now convinced himself that it's okay to be alone with this woman. And on down the road, he makes little decisions of convincing himself that this is okay, and he ends up having sex with her, even though he's been told even that she's a married woman and that she's married to one of his choicest soldiers. He still yet somehow convinces himself that this is okay. And if you know the story, then this woman, Bathsheba, she ends up being pregnant. And David finds himself in a really bad place. And so in his mind, he thinks if I call her husband to come back home from war, then maybe he'll let me off the hook. And maybe by the time the message got to the battlefield and her husband got all the way back to Jerusalem, it would have been known that she was pregnant and that it was not her husband's. He was at war. And plenty of the servants knew that David had sent for her in his palace. And so whatever is going on in everyone's mind here, Uriah is too loyal of a soldier, and he isn't going to go home to his wife. And he isn't going to play that game. And so David ends up rationalizing more sin. He begins to deceive himself even more. We don't know exactly what he's thinking because the Bible doesn't tell us all the ins and outs of his thinking, but he could have been thinking of how he could protect his own name or how he could protect the kingdom. But whatever he's telling himself, he lies to himself and convinces himself that the best course of action is to make sure that Uriah dies in battle by putting him on the front lines of the army and the army pulling back to allow Uriah to die. Looking through it step by step, David rationalized his own sin and the whole time convinces himself that what he was doing was okay. But when all is said and done, what had David done? He had abused his power. He had violated Bathsheba. Some even speculate that it might have been non-consensual on Bathsheba's part. We don't know, but it definitely could fit in with the narrative that Nathan the prophet then says of the rich man just taking the lamb from the poor man. But it's not specifically stated in the text, but it could fit within the rationale of the biblical story. But he for sure at least had violated Bathsheba by committing the sin of adultery. He wrecked an entire family. He essentially murdered Uriah. And then when the baby is born, circumstances cause it to get sick and to die. And step by step by step, sin by sin by sin. David, he didn't recognize his own sin because the heart is deceitful above all things. And we're the master of lying to ourselves and convincing ourselves that it's okay. Psychologists, they actually call that a cognitive bias. The Bible calls it flattering yourself or deceiving yourself or having a deluded heart. In Psalm 36 and verse 2, it says this, in their own eyes they flatter themselves too much to even detect or hate their sin. Thinking, I'm not that bad, I'm not that wrong, and we flatter ourselves in whatever ways. We deceive ourselves, and that's why it's good for us to develop the habit of self-examination, of heart evaluation. If you do some research on this, you find that our self-deception of convincing ourselves that we're not as bad as we actually are, convincing ourselves that things that are not okay are okay, those self-deception actually manifests itself in our lives in 5 major ways. 5 ways that self-deception manifests itself is first of all, an addiction to distraction. You research it out, and it says that often we deceive ourselves by distracting ourselves. Because we're doing something wrong, we'll actually find ourselves intentionally or unintentionally distracting ourselves by doing things that keep us from facing the truth about ourselves. So someone might find an addiction to pornography to escape their actual problem, maybe in their marriage or with relationships. They escape or distract themselves with endless scrolling on social media or endless reading of the news or addiction to gossip or to even alcohol or drugs. It's all a distraction, an addiction to a distraction to keep us from really facing the truth about ourselves. People often deceive themselves in this way, to distract themselves with some kind of addiction. Another way that it manifests itself is through what's called manic cheeriness. This is the people that are trying to convince not only everyone else that they're happy, but they're trying to convince themselves that they're happy. This is often a way for people to deceive themselves into thinking they're not actually depressed, or maybe to deceive themselves into thinking they're not actually bitter with that person. I'm not actually angry at that person. So they distract themselves. They bring up this contrived happiness in their lives to convince themselves or deceive themselves from the actual truth of their life, which is that they're angry or they're bitter or they're depressed. They put on a front of happiness. Another way that this manifests itself is judgmentalism. We have something wrong with us, but in fact, instead of focusing on what's wrong with us, we start to focus on what's wrong with everybody else. Like, man, I can't believe they're doing that, and I can't believe they're doing that, and I can't believe they're doing that. It's another form of distraction that keeps us from having to actually face what's wrong with us. Why? Because we want to focus on the little speck, as Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, the little speck in other people's eyes, rather than dealing with the 2x4 or the log sticking out of our own eye. We're constantly looking and trying to judge other people for what they're doing to keep ourselves from having to deal with what we actually dislike in ourselves. Another way this manifests is through defensiveness. We're offended if anyone even makes a suggestion that we might be wrong, that we might be vulnerable, or that we might be doing something sinful. We might deflect it and defend ourselves from the fact that someone might say, hey, I don't think you've been doing that for you. Hey, I don't think you're supposed to be in that situation. Hey, I don't think that's how the boss would have you to do it. And you get defensive and try to defend yourself against any kind of accusation. This is one way we deceive ourselves. If I can defend myself, then I'm right, even though we might not actually be right. And so we manifest self-deception through defensiveness. And then the 5th one it often manifests is through cynicism. We think that everything is bad and everyone else is the problem. And so we deceive ourselves into thinking that the reason we are the way we are is because of all the bad circumstances around us or all the bad people around us. And in David's life, he had deceived himself. He was in a dangerous place. He had rationalized some things. Maybe he had distracted himself from these sins that he had done. Maybe he was putting on a front of happiness. We don't have all the details, but he was in some way rationalizing, deceiving himself because he was trying to get to a point that he was okay with what he had done. And so If you follow the story of David's life, the Lord then sends a prophet named Nathan to David. And to help David see his sinfulness, the prophet told him a story. And I love how God had Nathan do this. Nathan comes and he tells David a story. And he says, hey, did you know there's someone in your kingdom, David, in your kingdom, very rich man, very, very rich man with really unlimited resources. In fact, specific resource he had, countless sheep, thousands of sheep, so many sheep, he had the most sheep. Like, he just had so many sheep. And his neighbor had one little lamb. And that lamb was really like a pet. And the very rich man had someone over to his house, and you know what he did? To serve food for his guest, he took his neighbor's one lamb rather than taking of the many resources that he had of himself. He took the one lamb from his neighbor and fed it to his guest. And David gets crazy angry about it. He's like, whoever this is needs to pay. And Nathan says it's these words, ataish, which means this: you're the man. He says, there's a man in your kingdom who's done this. And David says, that man needs to pay. And Nathan says, it's you, David. You're the one. You're the one who's been in sin. You're the one. And so God sends Nathan to David to show him that his sin is wrong before the eyes of the Lord. And David at some point ends up coming to this point in his life where he asks God that question that we saw in Psalm 139 that says, search me, O God. Show me if there's any wicked way in me. Show me the things that I don't see that you see and you want to change in my life. Lord, search me and know me, try me, and show me any wicked way in my life that I might walk in the way everlasting. David eventually got to that point, and I would ask us this morning, if you would to stop just for a moment and ask God to search you. What problem have you been denying? What problem in your life have you been deceiving yourself into thinking isn't actually a problem? So much so that you have flattered yourself into not even being able to see or hate your sin, as it says in Psalm 36. If you were to ask God, show me, what person might he send into your life like a Nathan to say, hey, you see that thing? That's wrong. What is that thing that you've been denying that the Lord wants to show you needs to get right? What sin are you rationalizing? What issue are you hiding? What's that thing in your life? You're like, man, this is personal. Yeah, welcome to church in 2025 where we're going to get after it this year, all right? Just so you know, if I haven't stepped on your toes yet, I'm planning to, okay? My intention is to get to everyone today, even including myself. But where does God want to work in your life? Where does he want to work? Is it a secret addiction? Maybe an addiction to pornography, or is it alcohol or drugs? Is it that you lose your temper over and over again? Is it that you're actually really angry and bitter at someone? Maybe for something that you feel really you can be angry at them for, but is it something that has caused a root of bitterness in your life that is causing you to not be able to love God and not be able to love people the way that you should? What is that in your life? Is it that you're really actually bitter at that person? Are you flirting with an affair? Or are you maybe in a full-blown affair? Are you saying you don't need help when you really do? The truth is that it's never a weakness to admit that you need help. If there's something in your life, it's never a weakness to admit you need help. In fact, it's always a sign of wisdom that you need help. When you ask for help, that's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of wisdom. Are you addicted maybe to overeating or to overspending? Or are you numbing yourself with social media or with TV? Or are you at church even the very first weekend of the year physically, but spiritually you're far from here? You're not here spiritually or even emotionally. Heart evaluation this morning. Pray, search me, O God. Know my heart. See if there's any wicked way in my life, that I might get it right and walk, Lord, in the way that is everlasting. Lord, would you show that to me this morning? Make that your prayer. Now, I want to give you 3 warning signs to look for as you cultivate this habit of heart evaluation. Because if you ask God to speak to you, the truth is He's going to. But sometimes we're not looking for how He's trying to speak to us. So three warning signs I think are good for us to look at. 3 things that might help us to be on the lookout when we ask God to speak to us, that we can, when He speaks to us, see it in our lives. 3 things that you should watch for. The first one is watch for what others have been trying to tell you. Watch for what other people have tried to tell you. This has not always been a rule in my life. It probably should have been, but it is now. That the rule in my life is this: if more than 2 people that love me tell me I have a problem, I better pay attention to that area of my life. If more than 2 people that love me are telling me about an area of my life, I should probably pay attention to that area of my life. You're working too much, maybe your friends and your family say. You're always looking at your phone. You're spending too much time on video games. You drink every night and you think you don't have a problem. You're dressing immodestly and you are saying that it's just for fashion, but really you know that this isn't the way that you should be dressing. You never say no because you have this people-pleasing problem. What are the things that people are telling you in your life? You need to get that right, and you keep rationalizing it and deceiving yourself and saying, no. That's not actually a problem. If a few people in your life that love you are telling you that's a problem, take some time and realize this might be God speaking to me and showing me something that's wicked. It might be God showing me a way that I need to change, searching me and knowing my heart so that I might walk in the way everlasting. Watch for what other people have tried to tell you. And then the second warning sign that you can watch for is watch for what you rationalize. Watch for what you rationalize. What do you try to explain away? What do you say, no, that's not actually a big problem in my life? What is it that you say, I don't think that's actually a problem? What do you say, I wouldn't do what I'm doing if you weren't doing what you're doing? You start rationalizing in those ways. When you hear a message preached, you say, well, that's just the pastor's opinion. Those kinds of things. What are you rationalizing? Watch for what you rationalize. It may be an indicator that it's an area that God is trying to show you that needs worked on. That's something that needs to be evaluated in your life. So watch for what others have tried to tell you. Watch for what you rationalize. And then watch for where you're most defensive. Watch for where you're most defensive. When people bring it up and you really quickly have to defend yourself for that. That you tell people that's none of their business. When it gets brought up in your life, do you go to bat for yourself the most in? What's that area of your life? I think it was Craig Groeschel who said it this way: the more convinced you are that you don't have a problem, the more likely it is that you do. The more convinced you are you don't have a problem, the more likely it is that you do have a problem in that area. So the more you press back when people try to press in, you need to take note of that. Take note of that. And the truth is I've had to learn this the hard way. In my own personal life, I've had to learn this the hard way. I'll give you one personal example. For years in my life, at one time, my friends, my family, and my mentors would say, Micah, you have a pride problem. They would look at me and say, Micah, you have a really bad pride problem. You can't let people be wrong. You've always got to correct people for the dumbest and silliest things that don't even matter. And you know what I always thought when they said that? They're just saying that because they're not as smart as me. And I know that sounds prideful. It's because it was. I had a pride problem. And so many people would say this to me, people that loved me, people that knew me. And I had really a good friend and a good counselor that at one point both told me that if you really want to get over this, you really want to make sure that this is not a thing that you're constantly struggling with, you're going to have to change some things. You need to practice some things. They even told me things like, practice going through a whole conversation without saying one word. And I was like, no one can do that. Not one person on earth can do that. How am I going to do that? That's a dumb advice that you just gave me, is what I was thinking when they told me that. But try to practice going through a whole conversation where you don't say a single thing. Stay silent. And then just sit there when someone's wrong and let them be wrong, even on some big things. Just do it. Just practice it. And I was like, that's stupid. Everyone wants to know when they're wrong, right? We all want to be right. So we need to know when we're not right so that we can be right. And I'm the one who's going to help people do that, is what I was thinking in my life. And they told me at one point, no, Micah, you're at a crossroads here. You can either stay the same way and wreck your marriage and wreck your relationships and wreck your ministry and probably never become a pastor like I believe the Lord wanted me to. Or they said, you can get over your pride, listen to what God is trying to tell you through other people, and get better and grow to be a pastor and a friend and a leader that God can use. Well, by the grace of God, I listened to their advice and I started letting people be wrong, as hard as it was. It's still hard. Some of you guys in small groups, I'm just like, no. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, it's still hard. Some I struggle with, but it was something that I had to start letting people be wrong. And I started listening in conversations, actually listening, not just listen to respond and tell people how they were wrong, but to listen, to actually be able to love people and pray for people effectively and understand where people are coming from. And you know what happened when, just by the grace of God, I allowed that advice to be something that I implemented? My marriage got better. My relationships with my friends got better. My relationship with my coworkers and with my boss got better. My relationship with my family, even my in-laws, got better. I was actually able to take a joke and have fun and playfully banter with people about silly things rather than everyone being on edge about whether I was going to correct them or not in a conversation. I found out that people really would rather follow a leader or listen to a pastor and hang out with a friend who is always real rather than one who is always right. And I'm a better husband, a better father, a better son, a better friend, and a better pastor because by the grace of God, I listened to some godly advice that came into my life at one point. And the truth is that there are some of you, there are some of us this morning that God has been trying to get a hold of you for a long time. And I want us to hear this clearly this morning, that you cannot change something that you will not confront. And so what is the thing that God's been trying to speak to you about that you haven't confronted yet? The truth is it's not going to change until you confront it. You need to develop this habit of heart evaluation, asking God to search your heart, to try you and to see if there's any wicked way in you. So what is the one thing even today that God's trying to show you right now? The thing that you probably don't want to face. What is God saying to you? If you're afraid of what it is, rest assured He already knows. You shouldn't be afraid of God. The truth is you should be afraid of what your sin will cost you if you don't get free from it. So what do? When we see the thing that we need to get right before the Lord, when we see that thing that is causing us to not be able to love God the way that we should, and when we see the thing that's causing us to not be able to love people the way that we should, what are we supposed to do in that situation? We're supposed to run to the Lord. We confess our need of Him. We run to the people who love us. And we confess to those, our family, our church community, our godly friends. You confess that sin. The two types of confession that the Scripture tells us about, it says you confess your sins to God, and He is faithful and just to forgive you of those sins and to cleanse you from all unrighteousness. And then He says you confess to your community, to the people around you that love you. He says confess your faults one to another and pray for each other that you might be healed. The pattern of Scripture is when we see those things in your life, we confess it to God for forgiveness and we confess it to others for healing. We confess it to God for forgiveness and we confess it to others for healing. Because the heart truly is deceitful above all things, and that's why we need to have the Lord evaluate us, allow His evaluation into our life. This is why David prayed this prayer in another one of his Psalms. In Psalm 51, he says this, "Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me by your generous spirit." David, you look at his life, and the truth is we all could look at that situation with Bathsheba and everything that transpired as a result of it, and we could all say, David sinned big time. No one walks away from that story going, David's the good guy. None of us. David sinned big time, and yet he is still described as a man after God's own heart. So the truth is, no matter what you're trapped in, this could be a moment of freedom for you today, that you confess that to God. And you confess to those who love you, that they might help you. What is God trying to say to you? What does He want to do in you? Don't resist it. He loves you and He wants freedom for you. And so the habit of heart evaluation, of self-examination, to ask God to show us what we need to hear, so that we can do what we need to do. Because the truth is, true self-examination is really spirit examination. Asking the Spirit of God to convict us in some way and to guide us in His truth. And so this morning I would say let us all determine to make this prayer of David's our prayer. And in fact, just to close out here, I want to just read that together. And when we read this together, read it and think of it as a prayer to the Lord. Lord, search me. Okay, let's read it together, starting there, Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Okay, read it together. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Why? Because if you want to change your life, you change your habits. But if you want to change your habits, you need to let God change your heart.